Summer 1944, when an Allied aircraft challenges a German U-boat. The submarine captain decides to fight it out on the surface.
The procedures changed during the war due to different aerial threats. At that time, they were supposed to do a crash dive to get away.
Even as the plane takes crippling fire from the gunners, the pilot appears determined to take the U-boat down with it. In World War II, a subsea weapon allows warriors to fight from beneath the waves. With cunning, force, and tenacity, their enemies strike back. Revolutionary, but still sometimes primitive, it's a desperate bid to change the course of war. Their stories are legend. January 9th, 1940. 40 miles off the west coast of Germany, Oberleutnant Zerzi, Heinrich Timm, conducts an anti-submarine patrol on board German minesweeper M7. In the past 2 days, the Germans have sunk 2 British submarines in what is called the Heligoland Bight.
The Bight is not a good area for submarines to operate in. It's very crowded. It's very difficult to spend time on the surface.
Only a few months into the war, the British Royal Navy hopes to enforce a blockade of the Third Reich. So another British submarine, HMS Starfish, operates here to keep German ships and submarines trapped in port. Lieutenant Thomas Turner spots what he believes to be a German destroyer. And prepares a torpedo attack. Turner checks again to finalize his firing solution, and is startled to find the German ship now fails his periscope. The watch aboard the German minesweeper sees the periscope pop up. The captain turns toward it and prepares a depth charge attack. With the ship closing in, HMS Starfish dives. There is little time to escape before the attack knocks out the submarine's hydroplanes, which are critical to their ability to dive. Desperate and in need of repairs, Turner decides to settle on the seabed, wanting to hide by staying quiet.
Turner's in a very difficult position. He thinks that he is being detected by hydrophones, and consequently he's very wary of putting on any motors at that point. Silence.
Turner hopes the German ship overhead will lose contact with his submarine. But on the surface, Tim has no intention of losing his prey. He prowls above and drops more depth charges. Finally, one detonates close enough to Starfish to damage the pressure hull. This releases air that escapes to the surface.
It's air bubbles from the submarine Starfish, which give away the position.
As darkness falls, the bubble allows Tim to focus his attack, and he drops more depth charges.
was coming to the point where if Turner did not surface soon, he would not be able to surface at all. He had to make a decision fairly quickly. Regardless of what was happening on the surface, Turner had to go up.
Surface! The crew races to destroy anything they want to keep out of German hands.
As the vessel is surfacing, he gives orders for the burning of documents. The other thing to do, of course, is to make sure the ship is scuttled, and that is standard practice. So as the vessel is preparing to be abandoned, seacocks are opened, if necessary, destroyed.
Suddenly, with its hull filling with seawater, the heavily damaged submarine pops up under the minesweeper's lights. There is nothing left for Turner's crew but to climb to the deck and surrender. But their efforts to sink Starfish succeed.
The Germans were in no position to board that ship. It sank without anything being lost to German intelligence.
Turner and his men become prisoners of war, while Heinrich Timm earns the Iron Cross Second Class for his textbook submarine kill and is promoted to Kapitänleutnant. But soon after, Timm abandons further advancement in the surface navy and transfers into submarine service himself.
A minesweeper, there is a very hard way to become a war hero. It's a job which needs to be done, but the submarine arm became very attractive to officers at his rank.
On his first patrol, aboard U-251, Timm sinks an ammunition ship bound for the Soviet port of Murmansk in April of 1942. His first kill as a submariner.
So he became something special because he was one of the rare commanders sinking a submarine from surface and later on being on a submarine and sinking surface ships.
But by 1944, with Italy out of the war, the remaining Axis powers, Japan and Germany, struggle to maintain a lifeline of supplies, technology and information thousands of miles long. Until now, the Germans employed merchant ships as blockade runners to transport vital supplies between Japan and Germany. But increased Allied air and sea coverage proves relentless.
A surface vessel hadn't any chance successfully to arrive in Japan. They had to rely on U-boats.
So the Germans fine-tune a class of submarine to make the long journey, the Type 9 D2. German engineers designed the Type 9 D2 with a double hull, allowing a hollow space for extra torpedoes and goods instead of ballast. And with larger fuel tanks, it can travel 31,500 miles, more than double the range of the other German Type 9 or Type 7 class submarines. Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz, longtime mastermind of the U-boat campaign, has been recently promoted and now commands the entire Kriegsmarine, or German Navy. He considers a special type of commander for the mission.
You needed not only a good fighter, but also a good seaman. So Dönitz decided to rely on very experienced U-boat commanders because they stood the highest chance of making this long journey all around Africa to Japan.
He assigns Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Timm to command a brand new Type 9 D2 submarine, U-862. Dönitz instructs Timm to stay hidden during his passage through the heavily defended North Atlantic. Dönitz knew he was losing up to a third of his U-boats operating here to Allied air coverage. Once clear of Allied air threats and convoy escorts, Tim can attack low-risk targets before delivering his cargo to the base at Penang. After skirting the coast of Greenland, Tim makes his way south across the Allied convoy routes of the North Atlantic. While traveling submerged, his hydrophone operator reports multiple sound contacts that might indicate an enemy ship. Tim decides to investigate, despite Dönitz's orders.
We can think about that he was aggressive to surface and have a better look around. On the other hand, you want him to follow the orders of the superiors.
Tim sweeps the horizon with his periscope, but is unable to locate any ships. As he orders down periscope, explosions rock the U-boat. Tim's curiosity has attracted unwanted attention. July 24th, 1944, the Mid-South Atlantic. A German U-boat commander, Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Timm, has spotted a merchant vessel and fires 2 brand new T5 acoustic homing torpedoes. But one of the torpedoes has malfunctioned.
Well, the great advantage for the U-boat, firing acoustic homing torpedo, was also the greatest risk. Because in certain cases, if the U-boat made too much noise, it would not aim at the intended target, but on the firing U-boat.
It now seems locked onto the sound of U-862's own propellers. Timm takes emergency action. He dives the submarine deeper and stops the motors.
It was a kind of emergency maneuver to switch off the engines. So for a while, the U-boat would hover within the water before getting either too deep or getting up to the surface.
He also orders complete silence from the crew, in the hope that the acoustic torpedo will lose its fix on the U-boat. Without the sound of the motors, the crew can now hear the torpedo too, roaring like a power saw.
All the sound is knocked against the hull of the submarine, and the torpedo is getting closer.
The torpedo speeds towards U-862. Then circles above 3 times, still seeking a sound contact. Lacking a target, the torpedo finally explodes without damage to the U-boat. It will become standard procedure to dive immediately after firing a T5 torpedo, but it is still new technology. Timm resurfaces, hoping that the explosion has not scared off his target. Fortunately for him, the Allied freighter continues, seemingly unaware of the subsea drama. Timm sets up a new shot, firing a fan of 3 conventional torpedoes. This time, they run true. Timm and his crew have made their first kill together. Three weeks later, U-862 rounds Africa and enters the Indian Ocean. Timm hopes for more opportunities to target merchant ships.
Admiral Somerville, the very able Indian Ocean commander, fleet commander, doesn't think he has enough assets for a convoy system. He can't escort ships directly. He doesn't have quite enough vessels.
And Heinrich Timm takes full advantage. He sinks 2 solitary freighters in quick succession. 2 days later, Timm stalks another merchant vessel, SS Nyrung. But the Allied ship proves to be a challenging target. Timm has already fired and missed with 1 torpedo. Now, after chasing the freighter for hours, Timm is able to get the enemy in his crosshairs. At 1,100 yards, he fires a spread of torpedoes. Phosphorescence in the water allow the men on watch to track their trajectory. It appears the torpedoes will miss to the stern of the vessel, when suddenly,
Nyrung is a very unlucky ship. She's full of explosives. And when she's torpedoed, she goes up in a huge explosion and effectively disappears.
The concussive force knocks the crew down, showering them with debris. The men below deck are tossed into the bulkheads.
Nobody would have expected such a huge explosion as Nairong did in this cataclysmic way. I could imagine after that people thinking about their own end.
After 6 days of continuous action, the men are exhausted. As the sun begins to rise, they count down the minutes before they submerge and can get some rest. As the sky brightens, they put on their sunglasses.
Petty Officer Peitel has a look around and he realized the sunglasses are dirty, so he took them off, cleaned them. And at that point, his eyes were not on the horizon. And when he looked up, he realized there's something different than before. And that was an approaching aircraft.
Out of the rising sun, Peitel spots an enemy plane, diving right for them. August 20th, 1944, the Mozambique Channel. In less than a week, German U-boat commander, Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Timm, has sunk 4 Allied ships in between Madagascar and the East African coast. As the sun rises, Petty Officer Friedrich Peitel spots an enemy Catalina flying boat diving towards them.
A base for flying boats has been established to act as a kind of stopper in the northern part of the Mozambique Channel.
Peitel sounds the alarm.
The procedures changed during the war due to different aerial threats. At that time, they were supposed to do a crash dive to get away.
Heinrich Timm considers whether he has time to dive. He decides they must fight and swings the U-boat into firing position. The crew mans the deck guns. The bomber approaches low, less than 330 feet above the water. At a range of 1,100 yards, Peitel has the plane in his sights. He asks Timm for permission to fire, but Timm delays, waiting for a better shot. The enemy closes to 550 yards, and again Peitel requests permission to fire. Finally, Timm gives the order. The U-boat's guns erupt, spraying bullets into the oncoming aircraft. Peitel makes several hits before his gun jams. The submarine's smaller cannons continue to pepper the aircraft with bullets, aiming for the cockpit and at the nose.
The guy at the anti-aircraft gun, for him it was like a duel, like two knights fighting against each other.
The Catalina pilot does not bank away. He appears on a collision course with U-862. Timm orders evasive measures, angling the boat hard to starboard. As the Catalina bomber speeds towards U-862, the German submariners on deck duck for cover. Skimming about 50 feet above the surface, the wounded Catalina just misses U-862's conning tower. It crashes and explodes in the ocean. Timm worries the aircraft radioed a sighting report of the U-boat. He does not want to risk his cargo. He decides to dive and run. They now head directly for their destination. At last, on September 9th, 1944, they arrive in Penang to a warm welcome from their Japanese hosts.
So it was a great moment when German U-boat successfully arrived in Penang after this journey over thousands of kilometers through enemy waters. And so they received a kind of hero's welcome with speeches, with music.
Tim allows the crew to disembark and enjoy time ashore in Penang and Singapore before he calls them back to prepare for their next voyage. They load U-862's keel with war materials that are hard to come by in Germany. Molybdenum and tungsten, key ingredients for high-grade steel. But rather than return to the Reich immediately to resupply the German war machine, Tim proposes a bold detour to Australia.
I think as the man on the spot, Tim is recognizing that he can create sufficient chaos to tie down a lot of enemy assets in an area where they aren't expecting an attack.
Things in Nazi Germany have worsened drastically since Tim left. By September 1944, Allied advances in France require Karl Dönitz to evacuate his U-boats from French ports. The Allies press toward Berlin from all directions. Germany is nearly cut off and in desperate need of supplies. Despite this, German Naval Command sees value in Tim's proposal.
Dönitz's consent in Tim's plan to operate off the Australian coast fixed very much in his kind of strategic approach. If you employ a U-boat where no U-boats have been seen before, you force the enemy to deploy vessels in escorting the vessels, protecting the trade, and hunting the U-boat.
It is an attempt to tie up Allied resources like planes and ships.
So in Dönitz's mind, it didn't make any difference whether his U-boats were fighting in the Atlantic or in the Pacific or the Indian Ocean, as long as they were able to sink enemy vessels. It's a kind of lighting the burden on other theaters of war by creating a new threat on another spot.
November 5th, 1944. U-862 sails out of Singapore, heading south towards Australia. But mechanical issues disrupt Tim's plans, and U-862 is forced to return to port. It is lucky for Tim. He does not know it, but his Japanese hosts routinely transmit information to their ships in order to avoid accidents.
Anything signaled was decoded very, very quickly. And therefore, when the Japanese send out signals to their own side to say, watch out, there are German submarines here, don't attack them, what they are effectively doing is saying to the Allies, here are German submarines, come and sink them.
Because it returns to port, U-862 does not appear where the Allies lay in wait. Other German subs bound for Australia are sunk this way, but they miss their chance with Heinrich Tim. On November 6th, U-862 slips unnoticed toward Australian waters. And the Allies lose the U-boat to the vastness of the ocean. Four weeks later, U-862 fights heavy seas off the southern coast of Australia, near Kangaroo Island. The watch has not seen a single Allied vessel, and the officers are growing impatient at the lack of targets. Tim decides to search nearer to the Australian coast, but this is more dangerous.
Given the nature of the anti-submarine assets, the aircraft and the warships available, if you go close to the Australian coast, you're much more liable to be spotted and attacked.
Finally, on December 9th, Tim surfaces to investigate a sound contact. The weather is terrible, and visibility is even worse. By the time Tim spots the vessel rolling in the waves, it is too late to make a submerged attack. There is not enough time for the torpedoes to arm. So Tim decides to strike with his deck guns on the surface during the day. Tim's first watch officer protests that this is a bad decision. Tim is undeterred and assures him they will wait until the last minute before opening fire to ensure surprise and accuracy. The gun crews get into position on deck, while Tim battles the wind and waves to get within range of the freighter. But as the storm slows his progress, Tim grows impatient. He orders the main deck gun to fire before they are also within the range of their smaller guns.
Two things are happening at that stage. One is there's a big wave washing over the deck and nearly spilling the artillery crew. And the other thing is the first shot missed the target.
The wayward shell alerts the other vessel. Aboard the Greek ship Elysos, its gun crew springs into action and returns fire. Heinrich Tim quickly realizes his folly. December 9th, 1944. Against the advice of his first watch officer, German U-boat commander Heinrich Tim attempts a surprise attack on an Allied merchant freighter with his deck gun. But as he hurries, a big wave hits the U-boat. His shot misses, alerting his intended victim.
At that point, Tim realized that he made a mistake. His first watch officer probably was right with his decision and advice. And now he is running into a serious threat situation.
Just one round from the freighter could puncture the U-boat's pressure hull and make it impossible to submerge. Tim quickly orders an emergency dive as shells from the Elysos pepper the water around U-862. Luckily, the rough weather shields the U-boat from view, and Tim makes his escape. But his ill-advised attack has announced the location of a German U-boat to Allied forces. The intense hunt for U-862 forces them to flee the shipping lanes off the southern coast of Australia and make a run south around the island of Tasmania. As Christmas nears, after journeying some 20,000 miles, the men busy themselves decorating and preparing for Yuletide festivities.
They tried to create a sense of home aboard the submarine. They had a special day, producing the same food as at home, so you could smell it, you can taste it, feel everything like being at home. To have a connection to the family, which will do the same in Germany.
But the celebrations must be put on hold, as on Christmas Eve, the watch spots smoke in the distance. Tim investigates and finds a freighter, the SS Robert J. Walker, en route to Sydney, Australia. Only a day away from port. A brief glow allows Tim to get into firing position. He sends 2 torpedoes toward the Allied ship. Both hit, but the ship remains afloat.
Robert J. Walker is a mass-produced Liberty ship. The Germans had great contempt for them. They called them Kaiser's coffins, and they said that because they'd been welded together rather badly, they'd fall apart as soon as they were hit. In this case, they certainly didn't. In fact, Liberty ships proved to be very tough.
The base at Penang had limited supplies, so Tim does not carry a full complement of torpedoes. He now only has 13 left for the remainder of his patrol. Still, he decides to risk another. But misses. Tim now has 3 torpedoes invested. And the Robert J. Walker is still on the surface and begins to radio for help.
So at the point when the ship made its radio transmission, Tim knew 2 things. The one thing was the ship wasn't sinking, and the other thing was the captain was uncertain about the explosion. Was it a mine or was it a torpedo? And now Tim had to make a decision to waste more precious torpedoes to sink the ship or to run away, to make the submarine safe.
At 0420 on Christmas morning, 4 hours after launching his attack on the Robert J. Walker, Tim decides to try again. He submerges U-862 and creeps in closer to guarantee success. Then fires a 4th warhead. Aboard the Robert J. Walker, the men on deck are alert.
Torpedo!
The torpedo is about half a mile away and closing fast. This time on target. Christmas morning, 1944. 218 days after leaving Germany. 160 miles southeast of Sydney, Australia. Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Timm of the German U-boat U-862 has 2 torpedoes into an Allied freighter and has just fired another to finish it off.
U-862's 4th torpedo is running on the surface. It's clearly visible.
Torpedo!
The crew of the SS Robert J. Walker watch in horror as the torpedo approaches. But this Liberty ship is not defenseless. The deck guns are crewed by members of the U.S. Naval Reserves. One of the sailors, Seaman First Class Harold Stone, springs into action.
Seaman Stone is an anti-aircraft gunner. He has a 20mm quick-firing Oerlikon anti-aircraft gun. He points it at the obvious torpedo coming towards him, squeezes the trigger, fires a number of rounds.
As the torpedo closes to within about 100 yards of the Robert J. Walker, one of Stone's rounds strikes. The torpedo explodes, sending water and smoke high into the air.
It's a sign both of the accuracy of his shooting and also a great deal of luck. The two reinforce each other.
Stone and his fellow gunners continue firing into the darkness to discourage another attack.
In the initial phase of the attack, it's not at all clear that the ship has in fact been torpedoed. But when the torpedo is destroyed by the anti-aircraft gun, then it's clear that there has been a U-boat attack, and therefore measures can be taken to try and prevent a further one.
While the crew launches a smokescreen to further obscure the Robert J. Walker. Aboard U-862, Tim is exasperated. He hears the explosion and sees the smoke. He assumes the torpedo has struck home. But still the vessel stays afloat.
After Tim fired 4 torpedoes, he had to reconsider the situation because now so much time is spent. He knew that the Allies are informed about a submarine attack. He's expecting naval forces approaching the scene to relieve the merchantman and to hunt the submarine.
If Tim fires again to assure the demise of Robert J. Walker, he will have used 1/3 of his torpedoes on just one target. But in the end, he returns to Karl Dönitz's wisdom.
Dönitz earlier in the war gave the order or advice that it's better to have one ship sunk than a lot of ships damaged.
At first light on Christmas morning, Tim fires a 5th torpedo. The gunners aboard the Robert J. Walker are ready this time. They immediately start firing along the path. For 4 minutes, Stone and the others pour rounds into the sea. But this time, the torpedo is too deep. It finds its mark. And tears a huge hole in the Robert J. Walker, buckling the deck. Tim, hoping to avoid the coming manhunt, speeds east into the Pacific Ocean toward New Zealand.
When he sank Robert J. Walker, he achieved another kill for himself and his crew. The amount of ships he sunk is not special, but what's special about him, he is the first submarine commander sinking a ship in all of the 4 world's oceans.
Tim patrols the waters off New Zealand, then begins a return trip to Jakarta for resupply and sinks one last vessel along the way. But despite a successful patrol, U-862 will never deliver its cargo of war material. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler commits suicide and Germany surrenders a week later. Tim and his crew hand their U-boat over to the Japanese and are detained long after peace in Europe and Asia.
By this stage of the war, the U-boat campaign had become somewhat peripheral. I suppose you can't get much more peripheral than a U-boat in the Pacific off Australia, and therefore it's not studied very much.
I think he didn't get the recognition due to the numbers. They sunk many more ships, the other aces, than him. What's special about him is a different kind of numbers. So it's the amount of sea miles he passed, the days he was at sea on his long journey.
Heinrich Timm's patrol to the Indian Ocean and beyond is unparalleled. He sails for 202 days and over 30,000 miles, traveling farther from Germany than any other U-boat captain, and demonstrates the extraordinary capacity for submarines to operate with stealth in the world's vast oceans.